Welcome, everyone. I'm Melody Benjamin. I'm Vice President of Member Services for Nebraska Cattlemen. We are proud to sponsor these monthly webinars in partnership with the Kentucky Cattlemen and the Minnesota State Cattlemen. We host these webinars the first Tuesday of each month, and we will probably be pausing for November and December, but stay tuned. We'll be letting you know about those. We hope you enjoy our webinar this evening. Your input is sought and appreciated, so please, if you have any concerns, questions, topics, let us know. We'd like to hear from you. Nebraska Cattlemen has a really busy time this week. We have this webinar tonight. We're hosting NCBA President Marty Smith and his wife Carol in Nebraska for a few days. We have an NCPAC fundraiser tomorrow evening. We have a board meeting on Thursday. So it's kind of a busy time. We want everyone to know we do have plans underway for the convention in Kearney. We will be having an in-person event that will be as close to normal as we possibly can do it. That'll be December 2nd through the 4th, as I said, in Kearney. Cattlemen's College will be December 1st. And that's the plans right now until the health directives change, and let's hope that doesn't happen. We have a few housekeeping things for tonight. If you have questions for our speaker, please type those in the Q&A box and they will be answered at the appropriate time. If you are having any technical difficulties, text Benita. Her number is 402-450-0223. That's 402-450-0223. We will be recording this tonight and it'll be posted on the Nebraska Cattlemen website. You can also find our webinars wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Tonight's speaker is with one of our partners, Elanco Animal Health. Eric Steiner is the Senior Director of Government Affairs, leading legislative and regulatory advocacy at the federal level. He collaborates daily with members of Congress, their staff, the regulatory agencies such as USDA and FDA, international trade negotiators, foreign officials, as well as livestock trade associations in order to achieve a collective success. Tonight, Eric is going to provide some updates on the U.S.-China trade agreement, including the specifics and the implementation of phase 1 of the agreement for livestock. Remember, if you have questions, type them in down there at the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, and Eric will answer them at the appropriate time. Enjoy tonight's webinar. Here's Eric.
Thanks, Mel, and thank you for each of the associations doing this evening. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you all for everyone tuning in. I know there's a lot going on. This is a difficult season in more ways than one, and do appreciate your time and attention to this issue tonight. Yeah, this evening I'll update on the ongoing U.S.-China trade negotiations and outline how you can help make this China opportunity a reality. The goal tonight is to lay out the market conditions that will provide a brighter outlook once we get past this very challenging season. Over the last 2 years, Elanco has been engaging in the U.S.-China trade negotiations with the actual negotiators, including our CEO, Jeff Simmons, along with other members of our executive team. Phase 1 of the U.S.-China agreement includes 4 big items for U.S. beef. The first is that the China approval of beef hormone implants that were previously banned. The second, China doubled the number of U.S. beef plants approved for export to China. 3, China removed outdated BSE restrictions. And 4th, specifically committed to negotiations for China to allow U.S. beef raised with ractopamine. At Elanco, we call it Optiflux. We know there's our other competitors use different trade names, but ractopamine is the drug that we're talking about tonight. An overview of ractopamine in China. First, it's important to know that ractopamine has the Codex standard for food safety. It's internationally recognized, and it really is the gold standard, in part because it costs several $1 million extra to prepare the scientific submissions. It's more robust even than our submissions to the FDA. The second thing to know is that China banned ractopamine in China 20 years ago. This was during their clenbuterol scandal. Some of you may remember that. And in China, the word for clenbuterol is the same word that is used for ractopamine. It's because in China, they talk about the drug at a higher level description and not the actual trade name. So when people were using clenbuterol illegally, people were getting sick, people are actually dying in China. Unfortunately, the same word for clenbuterol is the same word for ractopamine. So at the time, China made the decision, we're going to ban ractopamine because, again, everyone knows it the same as clenbuterol. Again, though, phase 1 of the US-China agreement includes negotiation on resuming the use of ractopamine in US beef exported to China, and this will happen in 2 steps. First, China will conduct a risk assessment, and then, number 2, China will negotiate with the US to determine terms of trade consistent with the findings of China's risk assessment. Now, while there's not a specific timeline for implementation of the ractopamine-related provisions, progress is occurring and looks positive for the first half of next year. Now, why we're bullish on China phase 1. This action is consistent with China's 2015 food safety law, which was based largely on Japan's 10 parts per billion. China's law that they passed in 2015 would allow for the use of ractopamine without having to use the word. Again, it's an issue within China of ractopamine being the same word as clenbuterol. By taking the 2015 law and putting it into practice, they could use ractopamine in their supply chain and not have to use the word. China's goal is to establish 10,000 MRLs, or maximum residue levels, by 2020, and establish their own capability for establishing their own MRLs. This is significant because up to this point in China, there were 0 MRLs, and China relied only on codex or other scientific bodies. China, in phase 1, agreed to conduct a risk assessment for ractopamine, again, consistent with the US label and with codex. And also very important to note why we're very bullish and positive on this, China has met their timelines for all meat-related provisions. Not too long ago, we might have thought we were not reading it correctly if we knew that China was actually had met all their timelines for the trade agreement. Backing up to more of a big picture, I want to underscore that this is really an extraordinary development, because if not for African swine fever, we would not be talking about this today. Due to African swine fever, or ASF, China is facing at least an 18 million metric ton of pork shortage. And this is now compounded by Germany being delisted in September when ASF was found in their herd. If China approves ractopamine, then exporting additional US beef and pork to America's potential could reduce China's pork gap by 17%. Again, 18 million metric tons is a whole lot of meat. And if US beef and US pork exported everything we possibly could, it would only narrow that gap by 17%. That's why we know the demand in China is there today and is going to be there for quite some time. A couple other macro level considerations. You may have seen in the papers or on TV that there's a lot of rhetoric right now between the heads of state, between our president, between their president, and so far this issue of ractopamine has stayed below the radar, and talks about ractopamine are continuing. So even amidst the geopolitical issues, the nuclear proliferation, aggression in the South China Sea, we are still continuing this. I think it's important enough of an issue that China knows that they need the food to provide for their population, and the U.S. has beef and pork that we can send. They're going to do whatever they can to try and make that possible, regardless of the higher level disagreements that are going on and the extra positioning that's going on right now. Also, for those of you who may already know this pretty well, Optiflex ractopamine means value for the US beef, an average of $27 per head to the producer and $10 per head to the packer. So just for growing the same number of cattle, that's an extra $27 we want you to be able to keep in your pocket. While China represents a significant market opportunity for US beef, we could use your help to make this market a reality. And I'll close with this. We'd really like to ask you to please consider reaching out to your congressional delegations in Washington, D.C. with the following request. Support the full implementation of phase 1 of the US-China trade agreement. And then in turn, ask your House and Senate offices to weigh in with the White House, the Vice President's office, the US Trade Representative, and USDA. They'll know what you're talking about. And then when your congressional delegation reaches out to USTR and USDA, we'll be in good shape to maximize the potential of the China market for U.S. beef. Also want to mention NCBA has been very helpful on this. The administration could use continued political support to help make this a priority. They're doing well, but they need to be reminded, over and over again. If you might think of like the squeaky wheel, gets the grease. This is very positive, has great potential. We want to keep sure and make sure that our voices are heard in DC to help make sure that this will happen. So with that, I'll close and we'll begin to take questions. And again, really thank you for this opportunity. And I look forward to discussing further, whatever's on your mind. Thanks very much. See, Mel, maybe I'll just ask, can people ask through the Q&A feature of this webinar, or are there other ways that folks can ask questions?
Yes, we'd prefer that they use the Q&A, but if they're on the phone and they can't, we can't do that, if they would text Benita at that same number as 402-450-0223, she will share the questions.
Excellent.
You surely got some questions for Eric. This is a pretty big deal, getting beef into China and making it so that conventionally raised beef can get into China without having to jump through the hoops. So I know you've got questions. We can keep it anonymous. Just type your question in there and we'll get them answered for you.
Eric, I can start this question session off. You talked about that big 18 million metric ton deficit right now that we're seeing in China. What about that timeline? Obviously that meat's probably needed right now with AFS been ongoing here for a while. Can you talk about a timeline of when we could start seeing an increase in exports from the U.S.?
Yeah, thank you. I would say my best guess right now, and it really is a guess, is probably in the first half of next year. That doesn't, I know that doesn't narrow down very well, but the work does need to continue. China will do that risk assessment, and then based on that risk assessment, they will negotiate again with our trade negotiators in the U.S. One thing we do feel pretty confident is that China is been ready for this. They are prepared. They're working with JECFA over a codex, which is part of that process, and they're working through the process with the U.S. To do their risk assessment. And we don't foresee any new science need to be developed here. This is a molecule that's been around for a long time, has proven very safe and effective, and we hope to have that done as soon as possible. But we're really waiting on China and the U.S. negotiators now to complete their work. But my best guess, again, is about the first half of next year.
Okay, Eric, there's some questions there. Can you see them?
Yes, and it's a good question here. The upcoming election in the U.S., could this have an impact on the future progress of the trade agreement? I'm glad you asked, and thankfully, I would say at this point that we do not see that having an impact on this part of the negotiation. We know this administration, President Trump and his team have done very well. Greg Dowd, or I should say Ambassador Greg Dowd with the U.S. Trade Representative, has done very well about this. He knows cattle. He was raised on a cattle farm in Kansas. He understands this issue very well. and has really done a great job in pushing this forward. We also know that those who are advising the Vice President Biden's campaign are also very well known to the agriculture community, and they're very much on the same page. They understand this issue, they understand the molecule, and they understand the importance to not just the Chinese people, but to the exporters here in the U.S., to cattle producers, you know, across the country. So again, there may be other factors at a higher level that the U.S. and China may have continued disagreement about. But when it comes to exporting beef, exporting pork to China to feed their population, I would expect to see this continue below the radar. You may not see this in the papers much. You're not going to see it on TV. But this is one thing that they can continue to do to really help both countries. And you know, we've got the meat to sell. They have meat that they need to buy, and we think this is a good win-win. And that should not be affected by whoever wins the election. Also, just as to put out a good word for the career staff, the permanent staff within the U.S. Trade Representative, those are the negotiators. They are not politically appointed. Again, they've been excellent to work with for the last couple of years. They will stay in place regardless who wins this election. And they really are the down into the details, expertise, and they're really doing an excellent job. So we see that high confidence that will continue and continue to be done very well. Good question. Okay, I'm reading through here. What will happen if China doesn't come through in phase 1? At this stage, if they do not come through with phase 1, if they don't approve the use of ractopamine, then the U.S. cattle producers that want to sell and export to China would not be able to use ractopamine in their process. That would really be too bad, and really be a shame. Now is not the time when we want to see less money in your pockets. We know the product works, it's safe. There's no reason for China not to accept it at this point. And that's really just money that's coming off, you know, per head. And that's really why we're working so hard to make this happen. Again, we're not the only makers of ractopamine, but you're the customers, and if you aren't winning, if you aren't doing well, then you know it's not good for us either. So that's why we're pushing so hard, you know, behind the scenes and up front with our negotiators on both sides to try and make this happen. Okay, a question here. How big of a difference would it make if China would take our beef, or even other countries that have this ban? You know, there's probably some ag economists out there who can speak to this much more clearly than I can. I would take a stab at this though and say there is not enough beef and pork traded in the world right now to make up the deficit that China is facing. We expect that China will approve ractopamine for the process in the U.S. and then also from other countries as well, because they're facing such a shortfall. One thing I didn't talk about, I may go into just briefly. We know that China is working to repopulate their herds, but I think it's also important to note that China is really taking advantage of this opportunity to try and make the large commercial size herds much larger, and make that a much larger percentage of their pork production. And when they do that, they'll have better biosecurity controls. They will hopefully be more resistant to outbreaks of African swine fever or other items in the future, that they can protect better against that and protect their food supply. But at the same time, that's going to take time, and they know that for the foreseeable future, they're still going to need U.S. beef. They're still going to need U.S. pork. So I think it would take a long time for them to become quite self-sufficient again. But what is encouraging though is China does want to become self-sufficient in the right way, and but that opens the door for science to be the standard that they use, and that's good for the U.S. Okay, another question here. What's different about this process with beef versus what happened in pork? Yeah, I think a way to kind of describe this, and Tanner, you can jump in here too. You may have a better way to describe this. I think what we've seen with pork is with a much shorter life cycle. It's much easier to for pork producers to take ractopamine out of their supply chain. Pork is valuable for ractopamine, for using ractopamine. Pork producers would get about $5 extra per head if they were using ractopamine. And this is going to help pork producers too. If they accept ractopamine into their food supply and their supply chain, then we would expect that to be equal benefit for pork as well as for beef. And I think you would likely see the U.S. pork supply come back to ractopamine use to take advantage of that the extra meat production, but especially the extra profit. Again, $5 more per hog for growing the same number of hogs. You know, it's a gimme. I mean, and that's net profit. You know, again, for cattle, it's 27 per head. That's net profit after you've bought and used the molecule. With the longer life cycle for cattle, it's much more difficult to change that mid supply and mid growth stage. So it can take longer for beef to want to adapt to that. It was easier for pork to take that out of their supply to try to take advantage of the Chinese market. But again, the U.S. can't grow enough pork to, even with using ractopamine, to make up that delta, the 18 million tons shortfall. So it's going to take pork from the U.S., but it's also especially going to take U.S. beef. Another question here, how's China handling the approval of packing plants in other countries which could potentially export beef to China? I don't know enough to give a good answer there, unfortunately. I'm sorry about that. But that's something I'm sure they're probably working on. But we'll have to see how that goes. I'm sorry, I just don't have enough information myself. Question here, what kind of significance has COVID had on this trade agreement? As far as this portion of phase one, very happy to say it's had little to no impact. That's been very beneficial when the negotiators have known each other and worked together for so long from both sides that when they had to switch to virtual meetings and do everything web interfaced, they're meeting regularly. I do know that. I've been asked, I'm not at liberty to share exactly how frequently that is, but they are continuing their work. And if anything, in some ways, it almost makes it easier because they don't have to travel from one country to the next and adapt to the different time zones. They can schedule their Zoom calls or their webinar calls and proceed. I think that's only possible because they got to know each other so well before COVID hit. So at this point, in a sense, they've been able to continue without having much negative impact. So thankfully, that's the good news that we've been told. Let's see, there's a question here. Is there a possibility the Chinese risk assessment rate or time of application of ractopamine in our feed operations compared to the current programs? I do not know. Unfortunately, again, there's probably others that could answer that question a little better, a little more succinct. I don't think China is looking at their evaluation of the risk assessment towards our feeding operations in the U.S. I think they're going through their due diligence, so they can go back to China. The Chinese negotiators can go to China and say they have done a risk-based, science-based assessment, and hopefully we have no reason to think that they wouldn't say that's been a very positive experience for them. I think they're looking more at the due diligence for their scientific analysis and are not linking that to our production here in the U.S. Okay, another question here. Any interactions with the packer community on this topic? And if so, what has been the feedback from the meatpacking industry? The meatpacking industry has been very similar to the cattle producers that we talk to. Again, they make about $10 extra per head net if ractopamine is used in their supply. So that's money that they wouldn't mind seeing too. That's again 27 per head for producers, $10 for the packer. That's the more that can be exported to China, the more that has a multiplier effect on their own net profits. So that's where we think this is a win for producers. It's a win for packers, and they, as soon as China says yes, and the U.S. and China negotiate the exact terms for that, then we'll adopt those, and we'll be good to go. And hopefully everybody can continue making money. Question here: what's going to happen in phase 2? I do not know. That's a good question. That's a bit above my pay grade. As far as we're concerned, if China will agree to resuming the use of ractopamine in the U.S. beef and U.S. pork supply, then we should be we should be good to go. I don't know of other hurdles that we would need to overcome after that. Again, they've done the right thing on hormones, they've done the right thing on many other products, MRLs, and they've done the right thing on BSE. We expect they'll continue to do the right thing on their process to approve ractopamine again. Okay, another question here. Understanding China has been meeting their deadlines. What is your crystal ball saying about getting the ractopamine products approved via the MRLs? Again, with our best guess at this point is sometime in the first half of next year. We think that should be sufficient for China to complete their risk assessment and for the negotiation between the U.S. and China negotiators to wrap up. Yeah, good questions, everyone. Yeah, I'm happy to take more if y'all have more.
You have any more questions for Eric? We don't want him to slide by too easy tonight. There's one that just popped up.
Yeah, question, are we going to send cuts or whole carcass? I'm sorry, I do not know. There's other folks that are going to know that answer much better than me. I don't want to lead you astray. So it's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't know.
Eric, here's a question for you. Where do you feel the greatest impact will be in the protein sector if phase 1 is approved?
Oh, that's a good question. I think you'll see it for U.S. beef. The more you want to produce, the more we can sell. I think you'll also see positive movement in the pork sector when they can use ractopamine again. I do think this is a case though where rising tides lifts all ships. It's not always the case when we resolve trade disputes, but in this case, when we're facing such a shortfall of the 18 million metric tons of pork, that deficit in China, there really is going to be more than enough for U.S. beef and U.S. pork to use ractopamine, continue to use ractopamine in beef, and to start using it again in pork to the maximum of our processing our production and processing potential, the more we can get out the door, the more they're going to be willing and able to buy.
So a follow-up question to that, do you have any particular numbers of head counts for beef being shipped versus pork if it's approved?
I do not. I do not.
And another question, how does your everyday position on Capitol Hill help the average producer?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do the very best that we can, and again, this is where you can really help us, and it's really helping us help you in a sense. Is the more that so as I'm talking with members of Congress, as I'm talking with their staff, as I'm talking with USTR, they hear this message from me very frequently. But just to be very candid about it, if there is a senator or a member of Congress from Nebraska, Minnesota, Kentucky that reaches out to their delegation, then that's going to mean more to them. Yeah, so I'm a DC lobbyist, right? They can talk to me anytime they want to, but when they hear from folks that actually have the ability to cast a vote for them, that's going to matter more. You probably hear that a lot when you talk with folks who work in DC or have been to DC quite a few times, but it's true. You actually have a greater impact talking to your state delegation than somebody like me would. Now they'll listen to me and they'll come and they'll ask more details from me, but to help give them the political cover and the political priority to reach out to the U.S. Trade Representative, to reach out to the Vice President's office, that request comes better from you. You can be a bigger motivating factor than I can. So that shows them that yes, my producers, if I'm that senator, if I'm that member of Congress, my producers are asking for this. This will help my producers have a net higher profit in their pocket for raising the same number of animals. That's a good thing. The more I can keep my producers happy and profitable, the better it looks for me politically. That's their motivation. So that can be very helpful there.
So Eric, this other question will give you an opportunity to put a big bow on this.
Okay.
What is the most important takeaway for us as producers from this information?
Yes, I would encourage, and I can give this information out to the state associations, and Tanner can help with this too. There's this request really, we want to make it as easy for you as possible. So we can give you the language to use. You don't have to come up with anything yourself or any magic words. I know before I came to DC, I grew up on a farm, diversified crop and livestock, and I never dreamed of talking to anybody in Congress because, what was I going to say? So, but don't worry. I come from that background myself. Now haven't been in DC for a little while. We'll give you the messaging that you can use and literally put that into an email or put it or just on a phone call. You can read from it, and that's really all that you need to say. The gist of that is really to when you're contacting your congressional delegation, you want them to support the full implementation of phase 1 of the U.S.-China agreement, including the acceptance of ractopamine used in U.S. beef. And to be able to say then, to be shared with them, China is buying significant quantities of beef and pork. Ractopamine, improves competitiveness of U.S. beef. So if they're going to buy it, they might as well be buying it from the U.S. as much as they can. The second point then, China's zero tolerance for ractopamine represents significant lost income for U.S. producers and packers from reduced production efficiency. Again, an average of $27 per head to the producer and $10 per head to the packer. And then the third ask then is asking your delegation, please consider weighing in with the White House. Again, the Vice President's office, the U.S. Trade Representative, and the USDA. And if that can happen, if you can reach out to your delegations and ask them to take action on your behalf, then we'll be in good shape, and that'll help maximize the potential of the U.S.-China market that we possibly could have for beef. So this ask, if you're willing to weigh in, I know your associations are very good about doing this, but if you individually would feel so moved to make some outreach, that can really go a long way. That can be very beneficial in helping make sure that this gets pulled across the finish line and is ultimately successful, for all of us.
Well, I don't see any more questions. I'm going to turn it over to Allison.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Mel, and thank you, Eric and Tanner from Elanco for helping us put this on this evening. Obviously, trade is something really big when we're talking about export markets and just that bottom line of making sure that we're getting paid what we need to for our livestock and our livelihood. So we really appreciate all the work that you're doing on the Hill and with these trade negotiations and really representing the cattlemen. I will also echo reaching out to your senators and congressmen and sharing your voice. I've heard the exact same thing that Eric has when talking with our state legislators is we're their go-to, but ultimately they know it's pretty serious when you guys are taking time out of your day to share your concerns. So they really take it even more into consideration when you guys are reaching out. Other than that, thank you all for joining us tonight. We hope that you have a safe harvest, and please tune in. We will be planning our next webinar series for November, and stay tuned for details. Thank you all.